Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. So, let's talk about math in Atlanta, a surreal and hilarious show that is real in its surrealness. I'm pretty sure it's surrealism, but I like surrealness. I do. But yeah, so let's talk about Atlanta. I want to talk about the show itself, and how math is used in universe and outside of it on that meta level, and just the comedy involved and what I think about the show. You're free to assume spoilers ahead just in case. I would be safe, and you can do with that what you will. With that in mind, let's get into it. So with Atlanta, if you have not seen that show, what are you doing with your life? You know, but but more seriously though, it is an excellent show. So 4 seasons, spread weirdly enough over 6 years, 41 episodes. 41 is prime, by the way, and throughout of it, some of the most surreal, and sometimes rich, very interesting and hard hitting pieces of television. Right, it's great comedy, and through that comedy, you see a lot about life. And I'll be real with you, it's a black show that a lot of people got behind, which you don't always see, but you like to see it. And I like that because there's like a lot that they touched on as far as like race and class, and just the music industry and just life, and I think it balanced things pretty well. So I'm gonna get into it from there. And talk about how I feel about it even more as we go on. So when I think about Atlanta, right? If I'm thinking about in universe, it's very surreal, but there is still like a basis in reality. And so with that in mind, math is everywhere and it's in everything. But if we want to get more specific about some things, right? Like not only is there a math in the way that, the world is built, but there's a big focal point about the music industry, about rapping and managing, musicians, among other things, right? Um, and there's math in that. There's math in the money. There's math in the rapping. There's math in the managing the rapping. And there's math in the everyday life. There's math in just chilling. There's math in parenting. There's math across the board. And so when we get into like the rapping and everything, they don't really get into the specifics of the rapping because you see more on the management side. But when you look at that rap, there's a lot of math in that, right? There's math in how raps are constructed. There's math not only in the lines but the flows, right? There's math in the lines, math in the rhymes, math in the flow, right? And that's pretty cool. And if you got music involved, there's math in that and having everything sync up. And on the more management side, right, there's math in getting gigs and not getting screwed with said gigs. And there's math in a percentage that the manager is going to get of the money from that gig, and a certain amount that the rapper is going to get. And then it's like, it touches on some real world stuff because it's like, you got to see how that goes. Like, what's a good deal? What does one consider a good deal? And what you got to do to make sure you're not getting screwed, right? Um, and so there's that. You see like a lot of different things. Like you see financial struggles throughout the course of the series, and there's math in that, and getting out of that hole or getting into that hole. Um, there's math and just navigating that world too, right? And I think that's pretty cool. And to like go into the more meta side of things, there's math in the comedy, like just telling a joke in itself is something that's inherently mathematical. It could be boiled down to that, right? Like setup plus punchline equals joke, and you can play around with that. And Atlanta certainly does, right? It is very subversive. You don't always know how it's going to subvert your expectations, but you can be assured that it will, and it'll be surreal. And it's a funny show. And so there's a lot of math and what makes someone laugh, right? And a lot of math that be considered in how many jokes you're going to tell and what might land, and playing around with that basic formula, right? And there's the idea of like, there's visual gags, there's running jokes. There might be something that's written, there might be something that's spoken, there might be a combination of things, but the idea is, they're playing around with that basic formula of a joke, and there's only so many, minutes in an episode, and they have to decide how the story is going to play out with that, and if that story is going to play into the larger picture. And there's math in that, right? There's math in the lighting. There's math in how it's filmed, right? There's math not only in like like things like resolution, but in terms of like what sorry, in terms of how that things are filmed and how that makes you feel. Like, what does it do to you, right? Because I feel like with Atlanta, it has a certain aesthetic, right? And that's a choice. And right, I feel like it kind of gives you something that's grounded, but something surreal, something dreamlike. And there's math in that, right? And I think that's cool. There's math in deciding how long a show is going to be, and how it's spread out. With Atlanta, it's interesting, right? Because the first season came out in 2016, the second one in 2018, and three and four actually came out in 2022. And you had things like the pandemic that were a factor in that and getting things across. And what's interesting though is it was meant to be done when it's done, right? And so 41 episodes of interesting TV, because even though it's experimental, right, there's an idea that you can be precise with that experimentation, deliberate even. And I think that even with something like season three, which was like probably Atlanta at its most experimental, there was still some stuff that landed. Because see, I like the series overall, but season three was not my favorite. It's had some really brilliant moments, some really brilliant episodes, but there were some that I didn't care for, and that's okay. It made the show no less great, and I think it's interesting to take those chances because you got to calculate uh, the risk involved with that, right? And I think that's fascinating. And so it's just like not only is there like math involved in everyday stuff in the show, because there's math involved in everyday stuff in real life, but there's also math on that meta sense, right? Math in the production, math in how things are filmed, math in the acting itself, right? Because not only are you worried about sound and lighting and all that good stuff, but the acting, um, that is something to consider, right? Because you have characters who are going to be saying their dialogue in certain ways, right? They're going to be worried about their inflection, the way they breathe, the volume of what they're saying, timing for what they're saying, right? Because they're not just going to rush every second of dialogue unless the scene called for it, right? There's deliberate choices made in how they speak on what they're saying, right? So it's not just how you say it. So it's not just what you say; it's how you say it. And I feel like that is a choice that you see in this mathematical in nature. Timing is very important, and there's the idea of the writing, right? And how things are going to map out in a given episode. And so, we have a series that lasted 6 years, 4 seasons, 41 episodes, and it is very, very deliberate. And I feel like that shows, and I feel like that's great. Um, and there's just math in just so many other ways than the ones I mentioned, and I think that's really cool. And for the series overall, like I mean, I've talked about it over this, but I do dig it. Um, I again, the season three was not my favorite. There was like a lot of hit and miss for me, but like I respect that they took some chances. It was already an experimental show, and I feel like that was kind of experimental with their executive. But I feel like they kind of like went back to basics in a sense for that last season, but it was still experimental too. um, Now, if I want to talk about my favorite episodes, just because like if you go back, there's some that like stand out even amongst other awesome episodes. Like season one, episode seven, ban, in an acronym. So, and it's a really funny episode that I recommend because like it is all about political correctness, and it's just like they go some places, but there's not a point where I didn't really find it funny for the most part, right? Like there's some things in there that's just like, oh my god, really. And then like the one that was really high up there for me and may even surpass that one is season four, episode eight, the goof that stood by the door. It is the most ridiculous, amazing thing. Because right, it's like it's a documentary, like documentary style episode, right? And I think that's cool because going back to the math, right? There's math and how you're filming something, and there's certain ways that you can film that makes sorry that makes their product look like a specific type of genre, right? So just like if you're going for a documentary, there might be certain things that you can do to make something have that more documentary feel, right? And there's math in that. But anyway, the goof is set by the door, or still by the door. Oh my god. It is one of the most hilarious things I've ever seen. It just culminated to a scene where it was just like, it was deeply disturbing, but deeply hilarious. I could not stop laughing. I will never stop laughing about that episode. It is amazing. Uh, I'm sorry. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's amazing. Um, but yeah, so Atlanta is like it's really well written, really well cast. Everyone that's acting is giving it all. You could tell that the writers put a lot of thought into things. It's a wild, wild show. Um, and I recommend it. Yeah, so I think that's about all I have to say this episode. But just if you've watched Atlanta, let me know what you think about it. If you haven't, I recommend it. I'll see you in the next one. Professor Brian out.